You think you know the Philippines. You probably picture white sand beaches, crystal clear water, and maybe good karaoke. But what if I told you that underneath that paradise is a history so wild, so violent, and so incredibly clever that it sounds like fiction? We are about to go on a journey through 700,000 years of history to uncover the real origin story of the Filipino people. In this documentary, we're going to answer the questions that history books usually skip. Why is the country named after a Spanish king who never even set foot there? How did a $20 million receipt destroy the first republic in Asia? Why is the national flag the only one in the world with a secret war mode? And why is the national costume transparent? Spoiler, it's not to show weapons, it's a flex. From the tectonic car crash that built the islands to the anti-monster rituals hidden in modern etiquette, we are going to decode the DNA of a nation. This is the story of how a people survived 300 years of the convent, 50 years of Hollywood, and centuries of disasters without ever losing their soul. Buckle up. This is the complete origin story of the Philippines. Let's go back 60 million years, and let's watch the car crash. Okay, so the Earth's crust isn't one solid piece, right? It's made of these giant plates that are floating on molten rock, and they're always moving. The Philippines is the unlucky spot where 3 of these giants are crashing in the slowest car crash in history. You've got the giant Eurasian plate coming from the west, you've got the Indo-Australian plate coming from the south, and you've got the Philippine Sea plate coming from the east. The islands are literally being crushed from all sides. And what's wild is that the Philippines is bounded by opposite-facing subduction zones. That's incredibly rare. To the west, the Eurasian plate is diving under the islands at the Manila Trench, but to the east, the Philippine Sea plate is diving under at the Philippine Trench. It's a geological vice. And when these heavy ocean plates collide with the latter plates, they can't go up, so they dive down. This process is called subduction. As that plate dives deep into the earth, the heat and pressure are so intense that the rock melts. It becomes new molten magma. This magma is now lighter than the solid rock around it, so it has to go somewhere. It forces its way up, 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 until poof, you get a volcano. Do this for millions and millions of years, and all those volcanoes build on top of each other until they finally break the surface of the ocean. And that's how you get a chain of volcanoes, a volcanic island arc. That's what most of the Philippines is. It's not a country built on solid ground. It's a country built from the fire and ash of volcanoes that rose from the bottom of the sea. I said most. This is where it gets really weird. What if I told you part of the Philippines is an imposter? A piece of the country that doesn't belong. A stowaway that just drifted in from somewhere else. This is my favorite part. Let's look at the very first Philippine land masses to emerge. Around 60 million years ago, the first bits of land to pop up were parts of what we now call Mindoro and Palawan. But here's the twist. They are not volcanic. You can go there and look. The geology is completely different. That's because they're part of something scientists call the Palawan microcontinental block. And get this, it's literally a piece of China. It's a chunk of continental crust that broke off the giant Eurasian plate mainland Asia about 60 million years ago. And for millions of years, it just drifted south. Eventually, it smashed right into all those new volcanic islands that were popping up. So the land itself is a fusion. It's a violent collision of 2 totally different worlds, drifting continental rock and brand new volcanic rock. And crazy enough, that is exactly what happened with the people. But the first people to arrive, well, they are a total mystery. Check this out. In Kalinga, up in northern Luzon, archaeologists were digging, and they found something that just shouldn't be there. Stone tools, clearly made by human hands. And next to them, the bones of a rhinoceros that had been butchered. They found cut marks on the ribs and ankle bones, clear signs of butchery. They dated them. The tools and the bones were 700,000 years old. You heard me, 700,000 years. Our species, Homo sapiens, us, we didn't even exist yet. We wouldn't evolve in Africa for another 400,000 years. So, who was here? Who was living in the Philippines, hunting rhinos 750,000 years ago? Was it Homo erectus, an earlier human ancestor? Maybe. We don't know. We've never found their bones. It is one of the greatest, most tantalizing mysteries in all of human history. We haven't found the 700,000-year-old hunters, but we did find the bones of another lost human. And this one changes everything. Meet Homo luzonensis, or Kaleo Man. In Kaleo Cave, also in Luzon, scientists found 13 tiny fossils, a few teeth, some hand and foot bones. They're dated to at least 130,000 years old, and they belonged to a new and very, very strange species of human. First, they were small. The teeth and bones suggest they were tiny, maybe less than 4 feet tall, like the famous hobbit species, Homo florescentis, found on the island of Flores in Indonesia. But here is the mind-blower. Look at the bones. They had strangely curved finger and toe bones. You know who else has those? Apes and Australopithecines, our ancient ancestors who climbed trees. So you have these small hobbit cousins of ours who were apparently climbing trees in the jungles of Luzon over 100,000 years ago. But wait a minute. Luzon has always been an island. It was never connected to the mainland, even in the Ice Age. Which means Homo luzonensis, these tiny ancient people, must have crossed the open ocean to get there. This completely shatters the timeline for when we thought early humans became sailors. So let's recap. We've got mysterious rhino hunters from 700,000 years ago. We've got ancient tree-climbing hobbits who crossed the sea. But where do we fit in? When did our species, Homo sapiens, finally show up? The answer comes in 2 parts, and the first part involves walking. Okay, to understand this, you need to know about a lost continent, a real-world Atlantis. It's called Sundaland. During the last ice age, 50,000 years ago, so much of the world's water was locked up in giant ice caps that sea levels were, get this, 430 feet lower than they are today. That means Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula, they weren't islands. They were all one giant continuous landmass, a massive sunken continent connected directly to Asia. And the Philippines? It was almost connected. The island of Palawan, that imposter island from China, remember? It became a land bridge. Geologically, Palawan is part of Borneo. When the sea levels dropped, that shallow connection was exposed. So, Palawan was connected to Borneo, which was connected to Sundaland, which was connected to all of Asia. So the first Homo sapiens to arrive, they didn't need a boat. They just walked. And we found them. This is Taban Man, discovered in the vast Taban Cave complex in, where else? Palawan. The bones found there, a skull cap, a jaw, and a tibia, belong to Homo sapiens, and they date back as far as 47,000 years old. This is one of the earliest modern humans ever found in Southeast Asia, and he got there on foot. But caves also show evidence of continuous human occupation for 50,000 years, with stone flake tools used for workshops and signs of a diet of pigs and deer. So there it is. Mystery solved, right? The first Filipinos were walkers. But this creates a huge paradox. If the first humans were walkers, why is the entire culture of the modern Philippines, its language, its customs, and its DNA based completely and totally on the sea? This is the final and most important piece of the puzzle. The walkers, like Tabonman, were the first layer, a thin, ancient Paleolithic layer. The real story, the origin of the modern Filipino people, came thousands and thousands of years later. It came after the Ice Age ended, after the ice melted, after the land bridges of Sundaland flooded and vanished beneath the waves. This was the Austronesian expansion. These were the new arrivals, and they weren't walkers. They were, hands down, the greatest seafarers on the planet. These were the people who invented the outrigger canoe, the catamaran, and the crab claw sail, technologies that let them cross vast, open oceans. And they had a navigation system called wayfinding, using nothing but the stars, the sun, the ocean swells, and the flight paths of birds to find tiny islands in the middle of the biggest ocean on Earth. And here's the kicker. They didn't come from the mainland. They sailed. And the linguistic and archaeological evidence is clear. This epic migration started from Taiwan. This is the out of Taiwan model. At around 4,000 years ago, these master sailors got in their outrigger canoes, looked south, and they just went. They landed in the northern Philippines, in the Batanes Islands, around 2200 BCE. They brought with them their language, their farming, like rice and taro, their domestic animals, pigs, chickens, dogs, and their culture. And over the next 1,000 years, they spread and they mixed with and they mostly assimilated those first ancient walkers. There are over 160 different languages spoken in the Philippines today. 160, not dialects, languages. But here's the aha moment. Almost all of them, from the Ilocano in the north to the Cebuano in the south, belong to one giant family. It's called the Austronesian language family. And when I say giant, I mean giant. This family has 1,200 languages. It's spoken from Madagascar off the coast of Africa all the way to Easter Island off the coast of Chile. Before European colonization, this was the most widespread language family on Earth, covering half the globe. And the Philippines? It's not just in this family, it is a central beating heart of it. So this creates an amazing mystery. How did this happen? How did this single language group spread across 2 oceans? The answer is the Austronesian expansion, and it's the single most important story to understanding Filipino culture. This was a prehistoric seaborne migration starting around 3000 to 1500 BCE. These weren't just people in boats. These were the greatest seafarers on the planet. They had invented revolutionary ocean-going technology like the outrigger canoe, the catamaran, and the crab claw sail. Tech that let them sail against the wind, not just with it. And here's the kicker. The linguistic and archaeological evidence is overwhelming. We know where they started. We know where the source code comes from. Not mainland China, not Indonesia, Taiwan. This is the out of Taiwan model. Around 2200 BCE, these master sailors left Taiwan, looked south, and landed in the Batanes Islands in the northernmost Philippines. And from there, they just kept going, south through the Philippines, splitting east and west for thousands of years. eventually reaching every corner of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. And they didn't just bring their language, they brought a whole Neolithic starter pack. Domesticated pigs, chickens, dogs, taro, rice, bananas, coconuts, and yams. They were colonizers. And this leads to that collision I mentioned. This was the two-layer model. When these high-tech Austronesian farmers arrived, the islands weren't empty. Those Paleolithic walkers from Part 1, the relatives of Tabon man, were already there. The new arrivals, with their farms and their advanced culture, essentially mixed with and assimilated those ancient hunter-gatherers. The modern Filipino language is the result of that collision, but hang on, that's a huge claim. We're talking 4,000 years ago. These people had no written language, so how on earth do we prove it? How do we prove they were such masters of the sea? And how can we be sure that a word in Manila is related to a word in Madagascar? Well, the proof is alive. It's in the words you're speaking right now. And the proof of their skill? It's just mind-blowing. They had a system of navigation called wayfinding. No compass, no maps. They used the stars, the sun, the flight paths of birds, but the real key? They read the ocean currents. By some accounts, the best navigators were blind because they could lie on the hull of the canoe and literally feel the direction of the deep ocean swells, untangling the knots of different currents to find their way. It is just incredible. Okay, so how do linguists trace a language without a time machine? They look for core vocabulary. Languages change fast, except for the really important words. Words for mother, father, body parts, the sky, and numbers. These words are stubborn. They hang on for thousands of years. And this is where it gets crazy. Let's look at the word for 5. In the Philippines and Tagalog, it's Lima. In Indonesian, it's Lima. In Hawaiian, it's Lima. In Malagasy, the language of Madagascar, it's Dimi, a clear, predictable sound shift from Lima. Or how about the word for I? In Tagalog, it's Mata. In Hawaiian, it's Maka. In Malagasy, it's Maso, all from the same root word. This is the smoking gun. Linguists call these cognates. It's DNA for language. So we know they're related, but how do we know they came from Taiwan? This is my favorite part. It's the linguistic founder effect. Think about it. Where would you expect to find the most genetic diversity for humans? In Africa, where we all started, right? Everyone who left Africa, Europeans, Asians, Americans, we are all just one small branch of the total human diversity that still exists in Africa. It's the exact same with language. The homeland, the Urheimat, will always have the most diversity, and the Austronesian language family has 10 primary branches. And 9 of them, 9 out of 10, are found only in Taiwan. The entire rest of the world, all 1,200 languages, from the Philippines to Madagascar to Hawaii, all of them belong to just one branch, the Malayo-Polynesian branch. We're all, linguistically, a single branch of Taiwanese aboriginals. That's the out-of-Taiwan model. It's rock solid! So, that's it? Is Filipino just a pure, ancient Austronesian language? Oh, not even close. That Austronesian base? That's just the foundation. That's the concrete slab. The real fun begins with the layers of wallpaper and furniture that got slapped on top by every single empire that came through. And this is where you find the weirdest words in the language. Let's start with the oldest layer. Long before the Spanish, traders from India and Arabia were sailing through. They didn't stay, but their words did. They mostly came through Malay traders who acted as the middlemen for the whole region. So when a Filipino feels dusa or suffering, they're actually speaking Sanskrit. It comes from the word dukkha. When they talk about a devyata, a goddess or spirit, that's pure Sanskrit devyata. Words that feel as native as possible. Mukha, a face. Katha, a story. Sampalataya, faith, all Sanskrit. Even that bottle of alak or liquor, that's not local, that's Arabic from the word Arak, probably brought via Malay Arak. When a judge or hukom passes judgment, he's using the Arabic word hukom. This language is a time capsule of ancient global trade. But then, the big one arrived, Spain, for 333 years. And this layer isn't subtle, it's thousands of words, but it's how they were adopted that's so, well, Filipino. Sure, you get the obvious ones, like mesa, table, and silla, chair. But what about the word seguro? It means maybe or perhaps, but it comes from the Spanish word seguro, which means sure or certain. Yeah, a word that means definitely flipped 180 degrees to mean maybe. How perfect is that for a culture that avoids confrontation? Are you coming tonight? Seguro, which sounds like sure, but means we'll see. It doesn't stop. The Tagalog word for breakfast is almusal. It comes from the Spanish word almorzar, which means to eat lunch. The word for maybe, vaca, comes from the Spanish word vaca, which means a cow. Why? Who knows? Maybe someone pointed at a cow and said, maybe we eat that? It's a linguistic mystery. And my favorite, the word tarantado. In the Philippines, it means you're a jerk, an idiot. It's a real insult. But it comes from the Spanish word atarantado, which just means stunned or flustered. The language took a word for dazed and turned it into complete moron. This is what makes the language so rich. It's an ancient Austronesian chassis with Sanskrit philosophy, Arabic trading terms, and a massive layer of Spanish, all twisted and flipped to fit Filipino culture. But wait, there's one more layer, a stowaway word. What about a word like alcancía, meaning piggy bank? Looks Spanish, right? And it is. It comes from the Spanish word alcancía. But wait, where did they get it? They got it from the Arabic word kanz, meaning treasure. It's an Arabic word hidden inside a Spanish word living in a Filipino language. That's your history lesson in one word. This brings up one last question. We've only talked about spoken words. What about writing? Did they have it before the Spanish? Yes, they absolutely did have writing before the Spanish, and it was beautiful. It's called Baybayin. This was the pre-colonial writing system used in the Philippines. It wasn't an alphabet like ours. It was a syllabary, meaning each character represented a syllable. It was probably based on scripts from India, which again shows those ancient trade connections. But it wasn't used for writing history books or government records. Why? Because most of that, the important stuff, was kept orally in epic poems and chants. Baybayin was used for the personal stuff, for writing songs, for poetry, for sending letters. It was intimate. So where did it go? When the Spanish colonizers arrived, they brought the Roman alphabet. And for a while, the two systems lived side by side. But the new alphabet was mandatory for religion, for government, for power. And Baybayin just faded. This is the great tragedy, the replacement of the script, combined with the fact that most pre-colonial literature was oral, meant that a huge, unwritten library of indigenous knowledge was just obliterated, wiped out. We lost entire worlds. We have fragments of these great oral epics like the Hudhud of the Ifugao or the Darangen, the Maranao. But the one that really shows you the scale of what was lost is the Hinalawod from Panay. It's the story of 3 demigod brothers, and it is so long it takes 3 days to chant. That's the Lord of the Rings trilogy sung from memory. And that's just one of them. But here's the lesson. You can burn the books. You can replace the script, but you cannot kill a language. The spoken word survived. And that survival led to a whole new chapter. After centuries under Spain, then decades under America, the Philippines became independent in 1946. And the new nation faced a question. With over 100 languages, which one should be the national language? The dream started back in 1935, when the Constitution called for a national language based on one of the existing native languages. President Manuel L. Quezon created the Institute of National Language, INL, in 1937, with members representing the major language groups. After studying the options, they recommended Tagalog. Why Tagalog? Well, it was widely spoken and understood, especially in Manila, the political and economic center. It wasn't broken into smaller daughter languages like Visayan or Bicolano. And it had the richest literary tradition. So in December 1937, Quezon proclaimed Tagalog as the basis for the national language. But controversy erupted. Non-Tagalog speakers felt marginalized. So the name game began. In 1959, it was renamed Filipino to give it more of a national feel. Then the 1973 Constitution under Marcos called for a new national language, Filipino, supposedly to be developed from all Philippine languages. The 1987 Constitution, post-Marcos, solidified Filipino as the national language, still based on Tagalog but intended to evolve and incorporate words from other Philippine languages. So is Filipino different from Tagalog? Linguistically, they're still basically the same language, mutually intelligible. But the idea of Filipino is broader, more inclusive, even if in practice it's still Manila Tagalog with extra letters and loanwords. And that brings us to the ultimate linguistic collision, Taglish. What happens when you have a country where the national language is Tagalog-based Filipino, but the other official language, thanks to American colonization, is English? You get Taglish or Inglog, a natural blend, a code-switching phenomenon that's everywhere, especially in urban areas like Manila and among the educated middle and upper classes. It's not just random mixing. Taglish has its own linguistic patterns. It's code switching, jumping between languages, sometimes between sentences, intersentential, sometimes within the same sentence, intrasentential, or just dropping in a tag phrase, tag switching. People use it for all sorts of reasons. Maybe they don't know the exact word in one language, deficiency-driven. Or maybe they do, but switching languages adds nuance, signals identity, builds rapport, or just feels more natural, proficiency-driven. Some people look down on Taglish, seeing it as impure, but linguists see it differently. It's a linguistic resource, a mode of discourse that reflects the bilingual reality of the Philippines. It's even seen by some as a subtle reaction against the dominance of pure English or pure Filipino, a way of carving out a unique linguistic space. It's the living, breathing result of centuries of linguistic collision. Alright, so in parts 1 and 2, we saw how the Philippines itself is a collision, islands formed by tectonic crashes, people formed by waves of migration, the food, exactly the same story. But before we get to the delicious chaos of outside influences, let's strip it back. What did the first Filipinos eat? What did those original Austronesian voyagers who sailed from Taiwan 4,000 years ago bring with them and find when they arrived? Forget complex sauces for a second. Think foundational. The Austronesian starter pack included essentials like rice, taro, bananas, coconuts, yams, plus domesticated pigs, chickens, and dogs. Combine that with the staggering bounty of the islands. Over 7,000 islands mean coastline everywhere, so think abundant seafood. Add native fruits like mangoes, calamansis, papayas, root crops like taro, vegetables, ginger, and other local spices. The cooking methods were straightforward, driven by the environment and the need to survive in a tropical climate. Boiling, steaming, roasting over open fires were common. Cooking in bamboo tubes, placing them directly in the fire, was a simple and effective technique. But crucially, given the heat and humidity, preservation was key. How do you make food last without refrigerators? Two foundational ingredients became the bedrock of Filipino flavor: vinegar and salt. Vinegar, often made from coconut water, palm sap, like nipa palm, or sugarcane, wasn't just for tang, it was an antimicrobial agent, a brilliant way to keep meat and fish from spoiling quickly. Salt, harvested from the sea, was the other pillar of preservation. This combination, sour and salty, asim and alad, became the fundamental taste profile, the culinary signature you still find in countless Filipino dishes today. Think about kinilaw, the Filipino ceviche, raw fish cooked by the acidity of vinegar, maybe seasoned with ginger or onions and chili. That's ancient preservation technology right there, delicious and ingenious. And the coconut? Oh man, the coconut was life. They ate the fresh meat, drank the refreshing water, boiled the meat in water to make versatile cooking oil, fermented the water into vinegar, scraped the mature meat, and mixed it with water to make coconut milk or gata for enriching dishes. The leaves and trunks were even used for building houses. One source even said a family could live off just 2 coconut trees. That's your original pantry right there. Sour, salty, maybe some ginger or local herbs, cooked simply over fire or boiled, often using bamboo. So, here's the first big aha moment. That sour, salty base, that reliance on vinegar, that's the indigenous Filipino food DNA. It wasn't brought by outsiders. It was born from the islands themselves, a brilliant adaptation to the tropical environment. But this raises a huge question. If vinegar and salt preservation is the ancient Filipino way, why is arguably the most famous Filipino dish, adobo, known by a Spanish name? So, adobo, everyone thinks it's Spanish, right? The name is Spanish. Adobar means to marinate. When Spanish colonizers arrived in the 16th century, they saw Filipinos cooking meat in vinegar and salt, and maybe other local ingredients like garlic and peppercorns. This indigenous cooking and preservation method looked similar to their own adobo preservation method back in Spain, which often involved paprika, oregano, garlic, and vinegar. So the Spanish, probably out of familiarity, just slapped their name onto the local technique. Boom! Dopamine breadcrumb. Adobo is an indigenous cooking method that the Spanish misidentified and named. The original Filipino version, sometimes called adobong puti, white adobo, relied solely on vinegar, garlic, bay leaves, black peppercorns, and salt. Soy sauce, which gives modern adobo its characteristic dark color and umami depth, was a later addition brought by Chinese traders. This is completely different from Spanish adobo, which is often a paprika-heavy marinade or stew. This perfectly captures the theme. A native technique gets a foreign name and later incorporates other foreign ingredients, soy sauce becoming something uniquely Filipino. But Spain wasn't the first major influence. Long before Magellan, Chinese traders were sailing to the Philippines, possibly as early as the Tang dynasty, 7th to 10th centuries AD. They set up outposts, particularly in areas like Binondo in Manila, founded 1594, the world's oldest Chinatown, and they brought their rich food culture with them. What did they introduce? So much. Soy sauce, toyo. Fish sauce, patis. Though fermentation was indigenous, the specific sauces likely evolved with trade. Tofu, tokwa, various vegetables like Chinese cabbage, and techniques like stir-frying, gisa, and of course, two absolute titans of Filipino cuisine, pancit and lumpia. Pancit just means noodles, and the name itself comes from the Hokkien Chinese phrase pian esit, meaning something conveniently cooked. Makes sense, right? Quick, easy, versatile, Filipinos embraced noodles wholeheartedly, creating countless regional variations using different noodles, toppings, and sauces, pancit malibon, seafood sauce, pancit habhab, eaten off a banana leaf, pancit miki, egg noodles, pancit bihon, rice noodles, and so many more. And here's a cool bit. Noodles often symbolize long life in Chinese culture, a belief adopted in the Philippines, making pancit essential for birthday celebrations. Another breadcrumb, eating pancit is like wishing someone a long life. Then there's lumpia. These rolls were also brought by Chinese immigrants, likely from Fujian province. The original name might mean moist cake, rumping. Filipinos took the basic idea, a thin wrapper filled with meat and/or vegetables, and ran with it. You have lumpiang sariwa, fresh lumpia, often with a sweet sauce, various fried versions, lumpiang prito, and the super popular lumpiang Shanghai, typically filled with ground meat. It's another perfect example of taking a foreign concept and making it completely your own, a staple merienda or snack or party food. Okay, then came Spain. For over 300 years, 1565 to 1898. They didn't just name adobo, they brought a wave of new ingredients via the galleon trade connecting Manila and Acapulco, Mexico. This introduced New World ingredients that fundamentally changed the landscape. Tomatoes, onions, garlic, bell peppers, corn, potatoes, avocados, plus olive oil and techniques like sautéing and stewing. This collision of Spanish, Mexican ingredients and methods with the existing Filipino palate created a whole new category of dishes, often richer and tomato-based. Think menudo, pork and liver stew, caldereta, meat stew, often goat with tomatoes and peppers, afritada, chicken or pork simmered in tomato sauce, mechado, larded beef, pochero, beef and banana stew. These richer, often elaborate stews became fiesta staples, reflecting the Spanish influence on celebrations and communal gatherings. So we've got the Austronesian base, sour, salty, simple cooking, Chinese staples, noodles, soy sauce, and stir-fry, and Spanish richness, stews, tomatoes, sautéing. What's missing? America. The U.S. colonial period was much shorter, 1898 to 1946, but its impact was massive, accelerated by World War II, introducing efficiency and convenience. Think pressure cooking, refrigeration, changing preservation needs, hamburgers, hot dogs, sandwiches, mayonnaise, ketchup, and canned goods. And the undisputed king of American canned influence, Spam. How did this canned processed pork shoulder become a Filipino icon? It arrived with American GIs during World War II. In a time of scarcity, it was a shelf-stable, readily available source of protein. Initially, access to Spam and other American goods from the PX stores on U.S. bases was a sign of status, a bit of luxury. But it stuck around long after the war, deeply embedding itself in the culture. Why? It's salty, fatty, fries up beautifully crisp, has a long shelf life, and pairs perfectly with garlic fried rice, sinangag, and a fried egg, itlog. Enter Spam-silog, the ultimate Filipino breakfast comfort food, part of the whole family of silog dishes, rice plus egg plus protein. Final breadcrumb. Spam went from military ration to status symbol to beloved comfort food. It's a taste of home for many, a symbol of Filipino adaptability, taking something foreign and integrating it so completely it becomes part of the national identity, even while acknowledging its colonial roots. So, what is Filipino food? After all these collisions, indigenous Austronesian, Chinese, Spanish, Mexican, American, what defines it? The answer is all of it. But more importantly, it's how these influences were absorbed, adapted, and transformed into something uniquely Filipino. Filipino food isn't just a copy-paste of foreign dishes. It's a creative synthesis, a testament to culinary ingenuity. Adobo kept its Spanish name, but retained its indigenous soul, later embracing Chinese soy sauce. Pancit and lumpia arrived from China but exploded into countless unique Filipino forms tailored to local tastes and ingredients. Spanish dishes like caldereta or menudo were adapted using local ingredients, maybe calamansi instead of lemon, different chilies, and often adjusted to the Filipino preference for a balance of flavors, frequently incorporating that foundational love for sourness, asim, or sweetness, tamis, alongside the saltiness introduced by Spain. And spam, it wasn't just eaten out of the can, it became spamsilog, embedded within a classic Filipino breakfast structure, served alongside garlic rice and egg. The core lesson here is resilience and adaptation. Filipino cuisine is a masterclass in taking external influences, whether through friendly trade or forced colonization, and making them undeniably Filipino. It's about retaining that indigenous flavor DNA, sour, salty, reliance on local bounty, while skillfully weaving in new textures, ingredients, and techniques to create something new yet familiar. Think about sinigang, that iconic sour soup, often considered another contender for the national dish. It feels purely Filipino, right? Tamarind is a common souring agent, but its flexibility tells the story of adapting to local resources. You can make it with pork, beef, shrimp, fish, and you can sour it with tamarind, sure, but also guava, tomatoes, calamansi, unripe mangoes, batuan fruit, kamyas. It uses whatever souring agent is local and available, showcasing incredible regional diversity built upon that ancient preference for sour flavors. Or look at halo-halo, the ultimate dessert mashup. The name literally means mix. Shaved ice, milk, sweet beans, mungo, kidney beans, jellies, gulaman, fruits, jackfruit, banana strings, leche flan, Spanish influence, ube halaya, purple yam jam, indigenous, maybe even cornflakes or ice cream, American influence. It's a chaotic, colorful, refreshing, delicious reflection of the entire layered culinary history in one glorious glass. It makes no sense, and yet perfect sense. Ultimately, the origin of Filipino food isn't a single point on a map or a single moment in time. It's a continuous story of movement, exchange, adaptation, and innovation. It's history on a plate, reflecting the complex, layered journey of the Filipino people themselves. Every dish, from the simplest vinegar-cured kinilaw to the most elaborate multi-influenced fiesta spread, tells a story of survival, creativity, and the enduring power of flavor to define identity. So in our journey so far, we've seen how the Philippines is a land forged by collision and populated by waves of resilient migrants. Its languages are a tapestry woven from ancient roots and foreign threads, and its food is a delicious fusion born from necessity and creativity. The customs? They follow the exact same pattern. They're the software that runs on the hardware of history. At the absolute core, the bedrock of Filipino social psychology is the concept of kapwa. Now, this is super important. It doesn't just mean other people. It's much deeper. It means shared self, shared identity, a sense of being interconnected with others. It's the idea that you see yourself in others, that the boundary between self and other is fluid. You're not an isolated individual, you're part of a collective. This fundamental worldview influences everything else. Filipino psychology even distinguishes between interacting with ibang tao, outsiders, and hindi ibang tao, people considered one of us. How you behave, how direct you are, depends on whether you see the other person as part of your shared identity. And the goal is often to move people from the outsider category to the insider one. This is the foundation upon which everything else is built. And the most visible expression of kapwa, it's the absolute centrality of family. In the Philippines, family isn't just mom, dad, and kids, the nuclear family. It's everyone. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, second cousins you barely know but are still family, plus honorary relations like godparents, ninangs and ninangs from baptisms or weddings, part of the compadrazgo system adapted from Spain, and close family friends who become family. This extended web provides strength, stability, identity, and crucial support, emotional, financial, social. It's common for family members to work together, live near each other, sometimes in multi-generational compounds, pool resources, and rely on each other for everything, from childcare to job opportunities. This intense family focus naturally extends to a deep respect for elders. It's not just about being polite, it's deeply ingrained, a cornerstone of social harmony. You'll see specific gestures, like the mano po, taking an elder's hand and gently touching the back of it to your forehead. It's a beautiful physical sign of deference and asking for their blessing. You'll also hear specific titles used constantly: lolo and lola, uncle and aunt, kuya and ate, older brother and sister. Crucially, these aren't just for blood relatives, they're often used for anyone significantly older, even strangers sometimes, as a sign of respect. And don't forget po and opo, polite markers added to sentences when speaking to elders or authority figures. It's like adding sir or man, but woven right into the grammar. These are the visible customs, the outward signs of the underlying cultural programming. But where do these strong family ties and deep respect for elders come from, and how do they connect to the more subtle internal rules that govern social harmony? Those invisible codes, that's where the real aha moments are hidden. Remember that classic image? A whole community literally lifting a bahay kubo, a traditional nipa hut made of bamboo and leaves, onto their shoulders to move it to a new location. That is the origin story and perfect visual metaphor for bayanihan. The word itself comes from bayan, meaning community, town, or nation. Bayanihan literally means being a community, embodying the spirit and soul of the Filipino people. That image of carrying the house isn't just symbolic, it used to actually happen. It perfectly captures the spirit, neighbors coming together, sharing the load, helping someone move their entire world without expecting payment, just for the good of the community. It's kapwa in action, shared responsibility, mutual support. Today, you see bayanihan in communities, pooling resources after a typhoon, or overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, sending remittances back home, hailed as modern heroes, bayani, for supporting their families and nation's economy. This deep-seated need for community harmony also fuels another important value, pakikisama. This often translates to getting along, maintaining smooth interpersonal relationships, SIR in Filipino psychology, sometimes even conforming to group expectations to avoid causing conflict or disrupting group harmony. In a collectivist society where the group's well-being often takes precedence over individual desires, pakikisama is the social lubricant that keeps things running smoothly. It means being agreeable, showing camaraderie, avoiding direct confrontation, and prioritizing group cohesion. This often leads Filipinos communicating indirectly, using hints, suggestions, nonverbal cues, and relying heavily on pakikiramdam, shared inner perception, feeling things out, sensitivity to others' nonverbal cues to understand the real message and avoid causing offense. It's about reading the room, understanding unspoken feelings. Now let's dive into one of the most talked about and often misunderstood Filipino values, utang na loob. The common translation is debt of gratitude. And sure, it involves reciprocity. If someone does you a significant favor, helps you out in a time of need, you feel a deep sense of obligation to repay that kindness. But calling it just a debt totally misses the crucial part. Loob. Loob means inside, your inner self, your will, your heart, your core being. So, utang na loob isn't just an external transaction like a bank loan. It's an internal feeling of profound gratitude, a recognition of a relationship built on mutual support and shared humanity. Kapwa. It's not about a precise one-time repayment that cancels the debt. It's about maintaining that relationship, being ready to help the other person when they need it, keeping the cycle of goodwill and mutual support going indefinitely. It's driven by appreciation and satisfaction, motivating you to give back with equal feeling and intensity. It's less about I owe you, and more about we're connected, we support each other. This explains why favors often extend through families and across generations. It's about maintaining those vital social bonds. Okay, let's tackle the other really complex one, haya. Usually translated as shame, which sounds purely negative, right? But like utang na loob, the direct English translation is woefully inadequate and misses the cultural nuance. Haya is better understood as a sense of social propriety, an awareness of how your actions reflect on yourself and others within your social sphere, especially your family. It's about maintaining face, both for yourself and for your group. Haya motivates Filipinos to live up to accepted standards of behavior. Acting inappropriately, failing to show respect, or being seen as incapable doesn't just embarrass you as an individual, it brings shame, haya, onto your entire family, reflecting poorly on their upbringing and standing. This is why Filipinos might go to great lengths, sometimes spending more than they can afford on a fiesta or a gift to avoid the haya of appearing stingy, inhospitable, or unable to meet social expectations. It also plays a huge role in that indirect communication we talked about. You avoid directly criticizing someone, delivering bad news bluntly, or saying no to a request because you don't want to cause them haya, to make them lose face. But here's the crucial insight. Filipino psychologists like Virgilio Enriquez argue that haya isn't just about avoiding embarrassment or social disapproval. At its core, it's deeply connected to dignity, self-worth, and a sense of propriety. It's about understanding your place within the social structure and acting accordingly, showing respect to others and thereby maintaining your own honor and self-esteem, amor proprio. Acting without haya can imply a lack of proper upbringing or disregard for social norms. In the Filipino diaspora, it's even been theorized that emphasizing haya became a survival mechanism for immigrant parents, teaching children to be mindful of their actions in order to avoid attracting negative attention or discrimination in a predominantly white society. So, while it can manifest as shyness, hesitancy, or lead to avoiding necessary confrontation, haya is fundamentally about maintaining social harmony and personal dignity within the community framework. It's the sensitivity to social context. And how does all this manifest in everyday interactions? One huge way is through Filipino hospitality. It's legendary for a reason. Welcoming guests warmly, offering them food and drink immediately, even if they just ate, making sure they're comfortable. All this is all driven by kapwa, treating the guest as one of us, avoiding the haya of appearing inhospitable, and perhaps even building a future relationship based on utang na loob. It's a beautiful expression of these interconnected values. Do you see how these values, kapwa, bayaninan, pakisama, pakikiramdam, utang na loob, haya, and amor proprio all interconnect? They form a complex social operating system deeply ingrained and largely intuitive for Filipinos, designed to maintain harmony, ensure mutual support, and navigate relationships within the community. It all circles back to kapwa, that fundamental sense of shared self. Think about the origins. Pre-colonial Philippines wasn't a unified nation, but a collection of largely independent, self-sufficient communities called barangays. These were often based on kinship, ranging from small settlements of 30 to 100 families to larger coastal principalities involved in trade. Leadership was typically held by a datu, raja, or sultan, often advised by elders, who functioned as lawmaker, judge, and executive, ruling through custom and consensus. Within these communities, there were social strata. The datu's noble class, maharlika, freemen, timawa, and various dependents or slaves, alipen, with differing obligations. Survival and prosperity depended heavily on cooperation. You needed your neighbors to help build your house, bayanihan, plant and harvest crops, defend against rivals, and maintain community order. In that tightly knit, interdependent context, maintaining smooth relationships, pakikisama, reciprocating favors, utang na loob, and being highly sensitive to social standing and potential offense, hiya and pakikiramdam, weren't just polite suggestions. They were absolutely essential for the community's functioning and survival. Centuries of colonization, first by Spain, then the US, briefly by Japan, layered new influences, like the Compadrazgo system, reinforcing kinship ties, and imposed new power structures. But these core communal values endured. In many ways, they became powerful tools for resilience, helping Filipinos navigate foreign rule, economic hardship, and social upheaval by relying on their tightly knit networks of family and community. The emphasis on family loyalty, the intricate web of reciprocal obligations, utang na loob, the careful management of social interactions to preserve harmony, pakikisama, hiya, and the striving for social harmony, these became defining characteristics of Filipino culture, shaped by both indigenous roots and colonial experience. Of course, like any operating system designed for a different era, these values can have potential bugs or face challenges in the rapidly changing, modern, globalized, and increasingly digital world. Pakikisama might sometimes stifle necessary criticism or dissent in the name of harmony. Utang na loob can unfortunately be manipulated in politics or business to demand loyalty over competence. Hiya might prevent individuals from speaking up against injustice or asking for help or asserting individual needs. The strong emphasis on family can sometimes lead to nepotism. And as Filipino society becomes more urbanized, individualistic, and connected online, researchers are exploring how these traditional relationship-based values are adapting or eroding. But despite these challenges and ongoing evolution, the core principles, the profound importance of kapua, the deep value placed on relationships, the willingness to help others, bayanihan, the emphasis on respect, and the striving for social harmony remain incredibly strong. They are the invisible threads that continue to bind Filipino society together, shaping everything from vibrant family fiestas to workplace dynamics to national identity. Understanding these customs isn't just about learning surface-level etiquette. It's about gaining insight into the heart and soul, the historical programming of the Filipino people. So, in the last few parts, we've seen how the Philippines is a story of collision. The land, the language, the food, the customs, all of it is a fusion of an indigenous Austronesian base with waves of foreign influence. The mythology, it is the perfect example of this collision. To understand the monsters, you first have to understand the world they were born into. Long before any colonizers arrived, the pre-colonial Philippines was a world buzzing with spirits. The ancient Filipinos were animists. They believed that everything had a spirit. Trees, rocks, rivers, animals, all of it was alive and animated by spirits called anitus or diwatas. These diwata, a term that actually comes from the Sanskrit devata, meaning deity, weren't just fairies. They were powerful, godlike beings, nymphs, and nature spirits. They were the guardians of the natural world. You didn't just walk into a forest and cut down a tree. You had to ask permission from the anito of that tree. You didn't just cross a river. You showed respect to the diwata of that river. If you respected them, they might bless you. If you disrespected them, they would absolutely punish you. And who was at the very top? For the Tagalogs, it was the supreme god, the creator of the universe, Bathala Maikapal. Bathala was the grand conserver of the universe, the caretaker of the world. But here's the aha moment. You didn't really pray to Bathala. He was too great, too mighty, living in the sky. If you needed help, you prayed to your local anito or dewata. They were the assistants, the ministers of Bathala, and they were the ones who would go and speak to him on your behalf. This was the source code of Filipino spirituality, a supreme creator, a world full of powerful nature spirits you had to respect, and your own ancestors who also became anitos to guide you. It was a world of balance, respect, and, well, fear, because you did not want to tick off a diwata. But this world wasn't just gods and spirits, it was also a world of monsters and the heroes who fought them. So you've got this world of powerful spirits, but you've also got things lurking in the dark. Let's start with one of the most famous, the tikbalang. This is the Filipino werehorse. But here's the first dopamine breadcrumb. It's not a centaur. A centaur is a man's torso on a horse's body. The tikbalang is a reverse centaur, a tall, bony, humanoid body with the head and hooves of a horse. Its limbs are so long that when it squats, its knees go above its head. The tikbalang is a trickster. It lurks in the mountains and forests, often living in giant balete trees, and it loves to mess with travelers. It will use its magic to make you get lost. You'll walk for hours only to end up in the exact same spot you started. So how do you beat it? How do you break the spell? It's simple. You have to wear your shirt inside out. Yeah, turn your shirt inside out and the tikbalang's magic is broken. But here is the real aha moment. Where did this horse-headed monster come from? Think about it. In part 1, we learned the first humans walked to the Philippines. The tikbalang existed in pre-colonial folklore, but it was just a forest ghost. There were no horses in the Philippines before the Spanish arrived in the 1500s. So the tikbalang got its horse head after the Spanish showed up. It's a literal collision, an ancient indigenous forest spirit fused with the image of the colonizers' frightening, powerful animal, the horse. And that brings us to the most terrifying monster of all, the Aswang. Aswang is a general term for a whole category of evil, shape-shifting creatures. They can be vampires, ghouls, or were-dogs. But the most famous, the one from our intro, is the Manangalal. By day, she's a beautiful, normal woman. She's your neighbor. She's the quiet woman at the market. But at night, She goes to a private place and detaches her upper torso from her waist, grows leathery wings, and flies off, leaving her lower half standing there. She is a truly bizarre, self-segmenting monster, and she hunts for the most vulnerable, pregnant women and their unborn children. So, in a world with tikbalangs and manangalas, who fights back? The heroes. The stories of these heroes were told in epic poems, chanted from memory for days. Let's look at the Biag ni Lamang, the life of Lamang, the great epic of the Ilocano people. This guy is the Filipino Hercules. His story is wild. When his mother is giving birth, she can't, so she calls for a midwife, who is an old tattooed man. Lamang is born, and he can already talk. He immediately asks where his father is. His mom says his dad, Don Juan, went to fight the Igorot tribe and never came back. So Lamang, still a baby, vows revenge. At just 9 months old, he arms himself with charms and goes to find his father's killers. He finds the Igorot tribe celebrating. His father's head is on a pike. Lamang, in a rage, challenges the entire tribe to a duel. He slays them all with his spear. He goes home and, well, he's really filthy, so he goes to the Emparayan River to bathe. The dirt from his hair is so potent it kills all the fish in the river. Then he decides to get married. He hears of the beautiful Inez Canoyan. He travels to his town accompanied by his 2 magical pets, a white rooster and a white dog. He finds Inez's house surrounded by suitors. To get her attention, he has his rooster crow. It crows so powerfully, a nearby house collapses. Inez looks out. Then he has his dog bark, and the house rises back up, good as new. He marries Inez, but there is a tradition. The new husband must dive for a rarang fish. Lamang knows this will be his death. He has a dream he'll be eaten by a giant fish called the burkakang. And he gets swallowed, but he has his magical pets. Inez gathers his bones, the rooster flaps its wings, the dog barks, and Lamang is resurrected, good as new. Then you have the Ibalong epic from the Bicol region. It's not just one hero. It's 3 heroes who build a civilization. First, the hero Baltog arrives. He's the first to plant crops, but a Tendayag, a monstrous giant boar, keeps eating them. Baltog wrestles the boar and kills it. Then the hero Handiong arrives. He has to fight all the monsters. He battles giant winged sharks, giant crocodiles, and a serpent woman named Oriol. After he defeats them, he establishes laws, introduces agriculture, and builds a society. But one monster remains, Rabot, a half-man, half-beast giant who can turn people to stone. So the third hero, Bantong, is sent. He doesn't just attack, he spies on the monster. He learns its habits. He discovers that Rabot loves to sleep. Bantong waits until the giant is in a deep sleep, sneaks in and kills him with a single stab. Wisdom over brawn. These stories show a world full of gods, heroes, and terrifying personal monsters. But that still doesn't answer the biggest question. Why the Aswang? This is the climax. This is the lesson. Why the Aswang? Why the Manananggal? Why is the scariest monster in the Philippines not an invader, not an other, but your neighbor? Think back to part 4. When we talked about Filipino values, we talked about kapwa, the shared self. We talked about pakisama, getting along, and hiya, social propriety. Filipino society, especially in small, pre-colonial barangays, was built on absolute community trust and harmony. Survival depended on your neighbors. So, what is the greatest, most terrifying threat in a society built on total community trust? The traitor from within. The Aswang is you. It's your neighbor, the beautiful woman, the friendly villager who secretly preys on the community, who targets the most vulnerable, the sick and pregnant women, the very future of the community. The Aswang is a psychological monster. It is the living embodiment of the culture's deepest, most primal fear, betrayal. The fear that someone inside your shared self, your kapwa, is secretly a monster. And then, the final collision. The Spanish colonizers arrive in the 1500s. They bring Catholicism. They want to replace the indigenous beliefs, Bathala, the Diwata, the Anitos, with their one true God. How do you do that? You don't just erase the old gods, you rebrand them. The Spanish friars saw this rich world of spirits and monsters, and they used it. They mapped their own Christian devil and demons onto these local beliefs. The Diwata and the Anita, those nature spirits and ancestors who were once respected and worshipped, were demoted. They were turned into evil, mischievous demons to be feared. The Aswang and the Manananggal, they became the ultimate symbols of indigenous evil, of witchcraft, and of female power that wasn't controlled by the new patriarchal religion. Here's the aha moment. The Spanish amplified the monsters to destroy the gods. They used the Filipinos' own fear of the Aswang as a weapon to make them abandon their Diwata. And here is the final beautiful lesson. It didn't work. Yes, the Philippines became a Catholic country, but the old world survived. It survived in these stories. The gods, the spirits, and the monsters, they all just got mixed together. They live on as folklore. They hide in plain sight in the mountains, in the forests, and in the scary stories Lolas tell their grandchildren. The myths and monsters of the Philippines are the ultimate story of collision. They are an ancient animist world full of gods and heroes that was invaded, demonized, and rebranded, but never erased. These stories are a living, breathing map of the Filipino soul. So, in our series so far, we've seen how the Philippines is a land of collision. A collision of tectonic plates, a collision of ancient migrations, a collision of languages, a collision of food, and a collision of gods and monsters. Well, the story of the country's name is the ultimate story of that collision. Let's get the main question out of the way. Who is the Philip in the Philippines? That guy is King Philip II of Spain. He was the king of Spain during its golden age, a guy who ruled one of the largest empires in world history. He was also, the guy who sent the Spanish Armada to try and invade England. But here's the first dopamine breadcrumb. When the name was given, he wasn't even king yet. He was still just the crown prince, Prince Philip of Asturias. And he didn't name it. The name was given in 1543 by a Spanish explorer named Ruy López de Villalobos. Villalobos was leading an expedition to try and establish a Spanish foothold in the region, which was a direct challenge to the Portuguese, who were also exploring the area. So Villalobos' expedition lands on the islands, and here is the aha moment. He did not name the whole country the Philippines. He only named the islands of Leyte and Samar, Las Islas Filipinas, the Philippine Islands, as in, these specific islands belong to our boy Philip. It was a political move, a way of planting a flag, claiming them for the future king. But wait a minute, if he only named Leyte and Samar, what did he call the other islands? This is where it gets even more interesting. He reached Mindanao first, and he named that island Caesarea Caroli. Why? in honor of the reigning emperor, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was also King Carlos I of Spain. He even named a smaller island, Sarangani, Antonia, after the Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza, who had funded the trip. So let's recap. In 1543, we have Cesarea Caroli, Mindanao, Antonia, Sarangani, and Las Filipinas, Leyte and Samar. It's a total mess of different colonial names all being slabbed onto different islands by one expedition. This creates a huge question. If Villalobos failed and all these names were floating around, how did Las Filipinas, the name for just two islands, win out? And more importantly, what was this place called before any of these explorers showed up? Okay, so what was the Philippines called before 1543? The simple answer? Nothing, because the Philippines, as a single unified country, did not exist. Just like we learned in Part 4, the pre-colonial Philippines was a collection of independent states. It was a diverse archipelago of kingdoms, rajanats, sultanates, and smaller communities called barangays. The Rajanat of Buton, the dynasty of Tondo, the Sultanate of Sulu, these were all their own independent states, trading with each other and sometimes fighting. So there was no one name for the whole thing. There were many names given by many people. Let's start with the first European explorer to arrive, Ferdinand Magellan in 1521. When Magellan landed on Homonhon Island, it just so happened to be March 16th, the feast day of Saint Lazarus. So, what did he call the entire archipelago? Las Islas de San Lázaro, Saint Lazarus Islands. That was the first European name for the Philippines, San Lázaro. But that's not all. Because they had reached the islands by sailing west from Spain, they also just called it Las Islas de Poniente, the islands to the west. And here's a great little twist. The Portuguese, who were their main rivals, were sailing east from Portugal around Africa. So what did they call the same islands? Ilhas do Oriente, the islands to the east. See, it's all a matter of perspective. But let's be real, Magellan and Villalobos were late to the party, centuries late. Traders from India had been coming for a long time, and in their ancient literature, they had a name for the region, Panupayana. But the most detailed records? They come from the Chinese. Chinese traders were in constant contact with the islands as early as the 9th century, and in their records, like the Zufan Ji from the 13th century, they call this area Ma'i. What was Ma'i? Historians debated. Some say Ma'i was the specific name for the island of Mindoro. Others argue it was a general name for the whole cluster of trading ports in the area, including Mindoro, Luzon, and Manila itself. But the Chinese had another name, a specific name, for the big island in the north. They called it Lusang. And this is my favorite aha moment of the entire story. Where did the name Lusang come from? It's not a Chinese word. It is the Chinese phonetic spelling of the local Tagalog word lusang. A lusang is a giant wooden mortar used to pound rice. You heard me. The name for the entire massive island of Luzon, the one used by Chinese traders, literally means rice pounder. Can you just imagine it? A Chinese trader asks a local, "What do you call this place?" And the local, who's maybe just pounding rice, says, "Oh, it's a lusang." And the name just stuck. It's so perfect. So let's look at the scoreboard. We've got San Lazaro, we've got Ma'i, we've got Lusang, aka rice pounder, we've got Cesarea Caroli, and we've got Las Filipinas for just Leyte and Samar. So how did Las Filipinas, a name for two islands given by a failed expedition in honor of a prince, conquer all the others? The name Las Filipinas, it almost died with the Lobos, who died in a Portuguese prison. The name won because of the next guy, the guy who succeeded, Miguel López de Legazpi. Legazpi arrived in 1565, and his expedition was the one that established the first permanent Spanish colony. This was the real start of 333 years of Spanish rule. And as Legazpi and the Spanish crown started to build their colony, as they started to unify these thousands of islands and hundreds of barangays under one government, they needed one name for the whole territory. They couldn't call it San Lazaro, that was Magellan's. They couldn't call it Mai or Luzon. Those were local or Chinese. But Las Filipinas, that was perfect. By this time, Prince Philip was King Philip II. So Legazpi and the Spanish administration made a decision. They expanded the definition of Las Islas Filipinos from just Leyte and Samar to cover the entire archipelago. And that is the origin story. The name the Philippines is the ultimate and most lasting symbol of the colonial collision. It is a foreign name given by a foreign explorer in honor of a foreign king who never saw the islands, that was officially spread by a colonial power to unify their new territory. And that name stuck. It survived the end of Spanish rule. When the Americans took over in 1898, they called their new territory the Philippine Islands. And when independence finally came, the new nation became the Republic of the Philippines. The lesson here is incredible. The name Philippines isn't an indigenous name like Mai or Luzon. It is a colonial name. But over hundreds of years of shared history, of revolution, of struggle, and of building a national identity, the Filipino people took that colonial name and made it their own. They transformed it from a symbol of a foreign king to the name of a proud, independent, and resilient nation. Okay, so in part 6, we learned that the name Philippines was a colonial import that the people reclaimed as their own. The story of the national symbols? It's the same story, but with even more revolutionary drama. Let's start with the big one, the flag. The year is 1897. The revolution against Spain is raging. The leader of the revolution, General Emilio Aguinaldo, is in exile in Hong Kong. He knows his new independent nation needs a symbol to rally behind. He needs a flag. So he designs it himself, and he asks 3 women living there in exile to sew it. Marcela Agoncillo, her daughter Lorenza, and Dr. Jose Rizal's niece, Delfina Arbosa de Natividad. They sew this first flag by hand out of fine silk at 535 Morrison Hill Road. Aguinaldo brings this flag back to the Philippines in May 1898, and on June 12, 1898, in Kawit, Cavite, he steps out onto his balcony, proclaims Philippine independence, and the flag is unfurled for the first time to the sound of the new national anthem. It's this incredible, powerful moment. But here is the dopamine breadcrumb that makes this flag so unique. It's interactive. Look at the flag. You got the white triangle and then 2 horizontal bands, blue on top, red on the bottom. That is the peacetime orientation. The blue stripe, symbolizing peace, truth, and justice, is in the superior position. But if the Philippines goes to war, the flag is flipped upside down. The red stripe, symbolizing patriotism and valor, goes on top. The blue stripe goes on the bottom. This is the flag's war mode. It is a visual declaration that the nation is in a state of conflict. This isn't some urban legend, it's law. And as far as anyone knows, it is the only national flag in the world with this functional feature. And it was used. It was flown red side up starting on February 4th, 1899, the first day of the brutal Philippine-American War. It was used again by the Philippine Commonwealth during World War II and by the Japanese-sponsored Republic when it declared war on the US and UK in 1944. This one symbol, a flag that can be flipped, perfectly captures the history of a nation defined by both a deep desire for peace and a fierce, unending struggle for freedom. And here's a bonus breadcrumb. This feature is so unique, it's even caused diplomatic blunders. In 2010, at a summit with President Obama, U.S. organizers accidentally displayed the flag with the red on top, effectively having the Philippines declare war on the United States. Whoops! That's just the first secret. The symbols on the flag, the sun, the stars, the colors, they all have hidden stories too. And they are not what you think. Okay, let's look closer at that flag. We've got the white triangle, 3 stars, and a sun with 8 rays. The white triangle is pretty straightforward. It stands for liberty, equality, and fraternity. It's also a nod to the emblem of the Katipunan, the secret revolutionary society that started the whole thing. Some historians even say it refers to the Eye of Providence, which inspired the Katipunan's ideology. The 3 stars? Aha, you say. I know this one. Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Wrong! Well, sort of wrong. Today it means Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, but the original 1898 Proclamation of Independence states that the 3 stars represent the 3 principal islands of this archipelago, Luzon, Mindanao, and Panay. Panay! Why Panay? Because it was one of the first places outside of Luzon where the revolution took hold. So Panay was the original stand-in for the entire Visayan island group, a little dopamine breadcrumb of history right there. Now for the sun and its 8 rays. This is my favorite part. The 8 rays, as we all learn, represent the first 8 provinces that rose up in revolt against Spain. But which 8? The ones placed under martial law by Spanish Governor General Blanco in 1896. Those 8 provinces are Manila, Cavite, Bulacan, Pampanga, Nueva Ecija, Laguna, and Batangas. And wait, Manila, Cavite, Bulacan, Pampanga, Nueva Ecija, Laguna, and Batangas. That's 7. What's the 8th? Well, today it is officially recognized as Tarlac. But if you look at the original proclamation document, the Acta de la Proclamación de la Independencia, Tarlac isn't mentioned. The 8th province listed in the 1898 declaration is Bataan. So what happened? Why the discrepancy? Historians still debate it. It's a 125-year-old historical controversy hidden in plain sight on the national flag. But the biggest collision story on the flag? It's the colors. Red, white, and blue. Why those colors? The Proclamation of 1898 is very clear. They were chosen, quote, commemorating the flag of the United States of North America as a manifestation of our profound gratitude towards this great nation for its disinterested protection which it lent us. Yeah, the colors of the revolutionary flag were a thank you to the United States, the very same country that the Philippines would be at war with just 8 months later, forcing them to flip the flag to its war mode against the country it was thanking. History is messy. Even the shade of blue has been a political football, with President Marcos changing it to a lighter shade in 1985, and President Aquino changing it back after the EDSA revolution. Now, let's talk about the song that was playing when this flag was first unfurled. It had no words. In 1898, Emilio Aguinaldo knew he didn't just need a flag, he needed an anthem, a marcha to stir the hearts of the revolutionaries. He commissioned a pianist and composer named Julian Felipe. Felipe composed a stirring, patriotic march. He called it Marcha Nacional Filipina. And that is what was played on June 12, 1898. Just the music. It was a national anthem with no words. It stayed that way for over a year. Then, in August 1899, a young soldier and poet named Jose Palma was inspired. He wrote a poem in Spanish titled Filipinas, and it just so happened his poem's meter fit Felipe's music perfectly. So, Filipinas became the unofficial Spanish lyrics. But then, another collision. The Americans took over. They banned the anthem and the flag for years with the Flag Act of 1907. Later, they wanted lyrics but in English. So in the 1940s, an English translation called Land of the Morning became the new official version. Then the Japanese occupation, which had another replacement anthem. It wasn't until 1956, nearly 60 years after the music was first played, that the final official Filipino lyrics we know today were adopted. The song? Lupang Hinirang, Chosen Land. So the national anthem is a perfect symbol. An 1898 march with 1899 Spanish lyrics banned by the Americans, given an English translation, and finally getting its Filipino words in 1956. Layers upon layers upon layers. The flag and anthem are the big ones, but the other symbols have just as many secrets. Let's start with the national bird, the magnificent Philippine eagle. It's the lord of the skies, a symbol of strength and freedom, and one of the largest and most powerful eagles in the world. But here's the dopamine breadcrumb. That's not its original name. For most of its history, it was known as the monkey-eating eagle, which, it's accurate. They hunt monkeys, but also colugos, snakes, and even hornbills. But the name isn't very majestic. So in 1978, President Ferdinand Marcos issued a proclamation to officially rebrand the bird, renaming it the Philippine eagle to give it a more, national feel. It wasn't until 1995 that President Fidel V. Ramos officially declared it the national bird, replacing the unofficial, humble Maya bird. But the final and most mind-blowing story is the national flower. The sampaguita, a small, white, incredibly fragrant flower. It's woven into garlands, hung in cars and on saints, and its white petals are seen as a symbol of purity, fidelity, and hope. It was declared the national flower in 1934 by Governor General Frank Murphy. Here is the climax, the ultimate aha moment. The sampaguita is not native to the Philippines. It's an immigrant. It's an imposter. The flower, Jasminum sambac, is native to the Himalayas, to India, and Bhutan. It was brought to the Philippines by traders probably in the 17th century. Even its beautiful name is a story of collision. The name sampaguita is believed to be a corruption of the Tagalog phrase sumpa kita, which means I promise you. This comes from an old legend about two lovers from rival barangays. They met in secret and promised to love each other forever, but their families forbade it, and the man was forced to leave. The maiden waited, but he never returned. She died of a broken heart, and on her grave a small, white, fragrant flower grew, a symbol of her eternal promise, her sumpa kita. And that is the whole story in one perfect symbol. A foreign flower given a new local name based on a local legend that is so completely embraced by the people that it becomes their national symbol of purity. Just like the name Philippines, just like the anthem's Spanish lyrics, just like the flag's American-inspired colors, the Filipino identity is a masterclass in taking the foreign, the colonial, the imposter, and through resilience, creativity, and pure heart, transforming it into something new, something uniquely and proudly Filipino. To understand the Philippine government, you have to delete the map. Forget the borders. Forget the Philippines. Rewind 1,000 years. There is no country. There are no provinces. There are just barangays. Now, you hear that word today and you think neighborhood, right? It's the smallest unit of local government. But the origin of that word is the key to everything. Barangay comes from balangay. A balangay was a massive wooden plank-edged boat. These were the vessels that the Austronesian ancestors used to cross the ocean, and when they landed, they didn't just split up. The people on the boat stayed together. The boat became the village. The captain of the boat became the datu, the chief. The rowers and warriors became the marhalika, or nobles, and the timawa, or free men. And the people who didn't have status? They became the alipin, or dependents. This is your first big aha moment. The original political structure wasn't based on land territory, it was based on the social structure of a ship. The datu wasn't an absolute king who ruled by divine right over a specific piece of dirt. He was a captain. You followed him because he knew how to navigate. He knew how to keep the ship afloat. If he was a bad captain, you could just move to another boat. You could shift your allegiance. This created a system of government based on kinship, loyalty, and mutual survival. It wasn't about lines on a map. It was about who you were with. These barangays were independent city-states. Some were small, just 30 to 100 families, but others, like Maynila, Tondo, or Butuan, were massive, complex Rajanate and Sultanates, with trade networks reaching China and India. So you had this archipelago of thousands of independent boat states, trading, fighting, and marrying each other. It was a decentralized web of power. But there is a myth we need to bust right here. Have you ever heard of the Code of Kalantiao? For decades, history books taught that this was an ancient pre-colonial legal code from 1433 written by Datu Kalantiao. It had laws like don't kill sharks and brutal punishments. Here is the twist. It is a hoax. It was completely made up in 1913 by a man named Jose Marco. There was no Code of Kalantiao. The real pre-colonial laws were oral traditions decided by the Datu and a council of elders. So we have a system of independent captains, but what happens when a foreign empire shows up and tries to put all those captains in a box? That leads us to the hack. The Spanish arrive in the 16th century, and they look at this web of independent datus and say, no, this is too messy. We need one king, we need one god, and we need you all to pay taxes. But how do you control 1,000 independent boat captains scattered across 7,000 islands? You don't just conquer them, you have to hack their system. We are about to see the greatest political magic trick in history. The Spanish didn't kill the datus, they hired them. If you want to know how your local mayor got so powerful, you need to see this. So, the Spanish want control, but there are only a few hundred Spaniards and millions of locals. They used a strategy called reduction. Basically, the Filipinos were living all over the place, near their farms, in the forests, along the rivers. The Spanish friars said everyone must live bajo de la campana, under the bells. They forced people to move from their scattered farms into centralized towns or pueblos centered around a church and a municipal hall. This is the origin of the plaza complex you see in every Filipino town today. It wasn't just urban planning, it was surveillance. But what about the datus? The captains? Here is the genius and evil part. The Spanish went to the datus and said, "Hey, you used to be a chief? Good news, you're still a chief. But now we call you Cabeza de Barangay, head of the barangay. You get to keep your status, you get to keep your land. You don't have to pay taxes, but you have to collect taxes from everyone else for us." Boom. In one move, the Spanish turned the indigenous leaders into colonial tax collectors. They created the Principialia class. This is the origin of the Filipino political dynasties. The families who were datus became cabezas, who later became mayors, who later became governors. The power stayed in the same families for 500 years. And this is where another famous Filipino concept comes from, the padrino system. Padrino means godfather. In the Spanish Catholic system, you have godparents for baptism. The Principialia used this to cement alliances. You make the governor the godfather of your child. Now you're compadres, your family. This twisted the ancient value of utang na loob, or reciprocity, into a tool for political patronage. I gave you a job, now you owe me your vote. The boat captain became the political boss. But the structure changed. It went from a web of independent boats to a strict pyramid. At the top, the Governor General. He was the representative of the King of Spain. He had absolute power. He was the executive, the legislative, and the judicial all rolled into one. He was essentially a king in Manila. For 333 years, this was the system. Centralized power in Manila, local power held by elite families. But eventually, the pressure cooker exploded. Fast forward to 1898, the Revolution, and here's a massive dopamine breadcrumb that gets left out of history books. The Philippines created the first republic in Asia. In 1899, in Malolos, Bulacan, the revolutionaries wrote a constitution. The Malolos Constitution, and it was advanced. It was democratic. It had a separation of powers. It established a legislature. It was way ahead of its time for the region. They proved they could govern themselves. They had a president, Emilio Aguinaldo, a Congress, and a cabinet. They were a sovereign nation. But they never got the chance to really govern. Why? Because of a receipt. While the Philippines were declaring independence and writing constitutions, Spain was secretly selling them to the United States. The price tag was $20 million. The U.S. paid Spain $20 million in the Treaty of Paris to take over the Philippines. The First Republic was ignored. It was crushed in the Philippine-American War. And the Americans? They brought a whole new system. Public schools, elections, and the English language. They called it benevolent assimilation. But here's the catch. At first, who could vote? Only men who owned property or could speak English or Spanish. Basically, the Principialia, the same elite families. So the Americans layered democracy on top of the Spanish oligarchy, which was layered on top of the indigenous chieftainship. They created the Commonwealth in 1935. This was the training wheels government. Manuel L. Quezon became the first president of the Commonwealth. It was a presidential system modeled directly after the U.S. It looked American, it sounded American, but underneath, the Filipino leaders weren't entirely sold on the American dream. In fact, President Manuel L. Quezon dropped one of the hardest, most savage quotes in political history. He said, "I would rather have a government run like hell by Filipinos than a government run like heaven by Americans." That is a mic drop. It captures the entire spirit of the era. They wanted independence, even if it was messy. And messy it was, because just a few years later, the government stopped being run by Filipinos or Americans. World War II, the Japanese invade. This creates the darkest political paradox. The Japanese set up the Second Republic. It was a puppet government, led by President Jose P. Laurel. Laurel is one of the most controversial figures in history. Was he a collaborator, or was he a hero who took the job to shield his people from the Japanese military? It's a question that still divides historians. But during this time, the economy collapsed. The Japanese printed new money. It looked like pesos, but it had no value. The Filipinos called it Mickey Mouse money. Why? Because it was like play money. It was worthless. You needed a bayong, a woven bag full of bills just to buy a box of matches. It taught the Filipinos a hard lesson. Government structures can be fake. Real power is what matters. Finally, 1946. The war ends. True independence. The Third Republic. But the boat was rocking. Corruption, rebellion, poverty. And then 1972. Ferdinand Marcos declares martial law. He tears up the Constitution. He centralizes power again, just like the Spanish governor generals. He rules by decree. And here is another myth, the Rolex 12. Legend has it that Marcos planned martial law with a secret group of 12 military and defense advisors, and as a reward, he gave them all solid gold Rolex watches. Is it true? Well, they did exist. They were his inner circle, the architects of the regime. Whether they all got the actual watches is debated. Some say they were Omegas, but the name Rolex 12 stuck as a symbol of the luxury and power they enjoyed while the country suffered. Marcos stayed in power for 20 years. It looked like the era of the Datu was gone forever, replaced by a single absolute king. But then, 1986, people power. Millions of Filipinos pour into the streets of Idas. They stop tanks with flowers and rosaries. They oust the dictator without firing a shot. It was the ultimate Bayanhan moment, the community coming together to move the house of the state. They wrote a new constitution in 1987, the one used today. It restored democracy. It put in huge safeguards against martial law. But here is the final climax, the lesson. Despite all these changes, from datus to kings to presidents to dictators, the heart of the government is still the barangay. The barangay is unique in the world. It's not just a neighborhood association, it is a government unit. It has a captain, barangay captain. It has a council, kagawad. It has its own justice system at the Rungan Barangay. In the barangay, you don't go to court for small fights, you go to the captain. He mediates, just like the Datu did 1,000 years ago. The Philippine government is a palimpsest. It's manuscript written over and over again. It has the form of an American democracy. It has the religion and centralization of the Spanish colony. But at its core, down in the neighborhoods, it is still a fleet of barangays. It is still a system based on captains, kinship, and keeping the boat afloat together. Let's start with the national costume, the barong Tagalog. If you attend a Filipino wedding or a diplomatic event, you will see men wearing this sheer embroidered shirt. It is undeniably classy. But for decades, a story has circulated that frames this shirt as a tool of colonial control. The story goes like this. The Spanish civil guard were paranoid. They were terrified of the Indios, the natives, carrying bolos or daggers to stage a revolt, so they allegedly passed a decree. You must wear transparent fabric so we can see what you are hiding, and you must not tuck it in, because tucking in is for your masters. It sounds plausible, right? It fits the narrative of the evil overlord perfectly. It creates immediate tension. You look at the shirt and you see a prison uniform. But here is the dopamine twist. Historians have looked for this decree. They have scoured the Spanish archives for years, and guess what? It doesn't exist. There is no law, no edict, no record of the Spanish forcing men to wear transparent clothes for security. In fact, historical records show that pre-colonial Filipinos were wearing loose, untucked doublets, baro, made of rough cotton or abaca long before Magellan ever showed up. So, why untucked? Because the Philippines is hot. It's a tropical archipelago with 90% humidity. Tucking your shirt in is a death sentence for your skin. The untucked style wasn't a sign of low rank, it was a sign of common sense. It allowed air to circulate. So if the weapon story is a myth, why is the fabric transparent? This is where the story shifts from politics to botany. The Spanish brought the pineapple plant to the Philippines from South America. They brought it for the fruit. But the Filipinos, they looked at the spiky, useless leaves and saw something else. They saw thread. They developed a process that is so insanely laborious it makes Swiss watchmaking look easy. They take the red Spanish pineapple leaf. They use a broken piece of porcelain plate, yes, a ceramic plate, to scrape the leaf until the green pulp is gone and only the fibers remain. They wash it in river water. They dry it in the sun. Then they knot the fibers together by hand, strand by strand. To make just 1 meter of cloth, it can take days or even weeks. The result is piña. It is gossamer thin. It is naturally ivory white. It is lighter than silk. And yes, it is transparent. But not to show weapons. It's transparent to catch the wind. The open weave lets the breeze pass right through to the skin. It is the ultimate tropical technology. So the barong isn't a badge of shame, it's a flex. Think about it. In the 19th century, the ilustrados, the wealthy, educated Filipinos, started wearing the barong. But they didn't just wear it plain. They covered it in hand-embroidered designs, flowers, geometric patterns, symbols. And where did they put the embroidery? On the hem, the very part that would be hidden if they tucked it in. By leaving it untucked, they were showing off artwork that was insanely expensive to produce. They turned the peasant style into a canvas of wealth that even the Spanish couldn't replicate. The weapon myth likely came later, a story invented to make the shirt feel more rebellious. Now, let's look at the women. If the men had the barong, the women had the Maria Clara. This dress is famous for its butterfly sleeves, camisa, the floor-length skirt, saya, and the scarf over the shoulders, panuelo. But here's literary breadcrumb. The dress is named after a fictional character. Maria Clara is the tragic heroine of José Rizal's novel Noli Me Tangere. She is the illegitimate daughter of a Spanish priest. She is beautiful, tragic, Catholic, and incredibly passive. She dies of a broken heart in a convent. For a century, this dress symbolized the ideal Filipina, modest, shy, and submissive. The panuelo was literally there to hide the shape of the neck and chest. But wait for the evolution. When the Americans arrived, the Filipina changed. She became a suffragette, she went to university, she demanded the vote, and the dress changed with her. In the 1920s and 30s, that Maria Clara evolved into the terno. The modesty scarf vanished, the neckline plunged, and those butterfly sleeves, they stood up, they became rigid, tall, and wide. The butterfly sleeve became a symbol of taking up space. The modern terno isn't a dress of submission, it's a power suit. And there is one more hidden fashion secret. The Mantón de Manila, Manila shawl. It's famous in Spain, it's essential to flamenco dancing, but it's not Spanish, and it's not really from Manila. It's Chinese. These silk shawls were made in Canton, China, shipped to Manila, and then sent to Spain on the galleons. The Spanish loved them so much they named them after the port, Manila. So when you see a Spanish flamenco dancer, she is wrapped in a Chinese shawl named after a Philippine city. So the clothes tell a story of adaptation. But if you want to see the story of combat, you have to look at the dance. Let's talk about tinikling. Two people sit on the ground holding two long bamboo poles. They slide them, tap them on the ground, and slam them together. Clack, clack, pow. A dancer stands between the poles. They step in, they step out. If they are too slow, snap. Their ankle gets crushed. It is the most famous Filipino dance. But where did it come from? The official story, the nature documentary version, is that it mimics the tickling bird. The tickling, a rail bird, is a pest to rice farmers. It has long legs and it runs through the rice paddies. The farmers would set bamboo traps to catch them, but the tickling was too fast. It would hop over the trap just as it snapped shut. The dance, they say, is just the farmers imitating the bird, mocking the trap. But there is a darker oral tradition, a shadow story that refuses to die. This version says the dance didn't start with birds. It started with punishment. The legend goes that during the Spanish era, if an India worker was too slow in the fields, the overseer wouldn't just whip him. He would put the worker's feet between two bamboo poles and smash them together. The worker, to save his ankles, had to jump. He had to learn the rhythm of the punishment. Jump, jump, out. Over time, this survival instinct became a rhythm. The rhythm became a challenge. The challenge became a dance. Which story is true? Historians lean toward the bird, but the persistence of the punishment myth tells you something about the Filipino psyche. They took a dance about nature and turned it into a story about surviving oppression. They turned a bamboo, the instrument of pain, into an instrument of percussion. But tickling isn't the only bamboo dance. Down south in Mindanao, there is a dance that is even more royal and even more dangerous. Enter the singkil. This is the dance of the Maranao people, and unlike tickling, which is a folk dance, singkil is a royal dance. It doesn't mimic a bird, it mimics an earthquake. The story comes from the ancient epic Daringen. It tells of Princess Gandingen. She is walking in the forest, accompanied by her loyal slave. Suddenly, the diwatas, the spirits, play a trick on her. They cause a massive earthquake. Trees fall, rocks crash, the earth splits open. In the dance, the bamboo poles aren't traps. They're the falling trees. The princess doesn't jump like a bird. She steps royally. She weaves in and out of the crushing bamboo with a stoic face, manipulating two fans up here that represent the winds. She's graceful in the middle of a disaster. And then the prince arrives, Prince Bantugan. He dances through the bamboo with a sword and shield to save her. This dance is a masterpiece of storytelling, but it also preserves something the Spanish tried to destroy, the pre-colonial epic. The Darangen is one of the longest epics in the world, and singkil kept the story alive visually when the colonizers were burning the books. But sometimes the dance wasn't just a story. Sometimes it was a combat drill. Have you ever heard of sakuting? It looks like a fun folk dance. Dancers hold two sticks. They tap them together. Click, click, click. They circle each other. They tap the floor. It looks festive, usually performed during Christmas. But look closer. The movements, the striking angles, the footwork. That's arnis. Arnis, or Kali Eskrima, is the indigenous Filipino martial art. It is deadly. It uses machetes and rattan sticks. When the Spanish conquered the islands, they banned the practice of arnis. They didn't want the natives knowing how to fight. So, what did the Filipinos do? Did they stop training? No! They hid the martial art inside the dance. They replaced the machetes with harmless-looking wooden sticks. They replaced the combat drills with choreography. They removed the contact but kept the flow. For 300 years, they performed sakuting right in front of the Spanish friars. The Spanish clapped, thinking they were watching a cute little native ritual. In reality, they were watching an army training for war. This is the ultimate dopamine payoff. The culture wasn't just decorative, it was tactical. And this tactic hiding the rebellion inside the art, didn't stop at dance. It went into the music. If you listen to a traditional Filipino love song called Kundiman, it sounds incredibly sad. It's usually in a minor key. It flows slowly like a river of tears. It sounds like a guy begging a girl to love him. Please look at me. I am dying. I am suffering. Typical romantic stuff, right? But in the late 1800s, during the revolution against Spain, the Kundiman changed. The revolutionaries, the Katipunan, realized they needed a way to express their love for their country without getting arrested. So they used the double entendre. They wrote songs to a woman. They called her Mutya, Muse, or Hirang, Chosen One. But the woman wasn't a woman. The woman was the Philippines. Let's look at the most famous example, Hasalina Jambaliwag. On the surface, it is dedicated to a real girl named Josefa Tion Gilson. The lyrics say, Pinopoong Sinta, beloved idol. Just a guy with a crush. But look deeper. The lyrics talk about a paradise that has been lost. They talk about a sickness that only she can cure. When the revolutionaries sang, Do not let me drown in the sea of pain, they weren't talking about heartbreak. They were talking about colonial oppression. When they sang, You are the only cure, they were talking about independence. This song became the anthem of the revolution. Soldiers sung it in the camps. They sung it before battle. To the Spanish ears, it was just a sad love song. To the Filipino ears, it was a call to arms. This tradition continued even when the Americans arrived. The song Bayan Ko, My Country. It starts by describing a beautiful bird that is free to fly. But then, the bird is captured, taliged. It cries, Ibon man may layang lumipad, kulingen mo at umiiyak. It's so simple, but it is so devastating. It became the anthem of the protests against the Marcos dictatorship in the 1980s. The Kundiman proves that the Filipino Revolution wasn't just fought with bolos and guns. It was thought with metaphors. But wait, everything we've talked about so far, the Barong, the Tinikling, the Kundiman, are all from the Christianized parts of the Philippines. What about the people who never surrendered? What about the South? Here, the music is different. There are no guitars. There are no sad love songs in minor keys. Here, there is the kulintang. This is the sound of the unconquered. It's a row of small, laid-in-a-row gongs. It is loud. It is rhythmic. It is trance-inducing. This music connects the Philippines directly to its ancient Austronesian roots. It connects them to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to the great pre-colonial maritime empires. The Spanish hated it. They tried to silence the gongs. But in the mountains of Mindanao, the kulintang never stopped playing. Today, kulintang is experiencing a massive revival. Filipino Americans are picking it up. Why? Because it is the purest link to the ancestor. When you look at Filipino culture, the clothes, the dance, the music, what do you see? You might see a mix of East and West, a fusion. But look closer. Look with the eyes of a historian. You see a survival kit. The Barong Tagalog isn't transparent to show weakness. It's transparent to survive the heat and embroidered to show defiant status. The Tinkiling isn't just a bird dance. It's a muscle memory drill for dodging traps. The Sakutin isn't just a stick dance. It's a secret martial arts class. The Kundiman isn't just a love song, it's a revolutionary manifesto hidden in the melody. The Filipino people didn't just accept foreign influences, they hacked them. They took the Spanish guitar and played their own secret codes. They took the Spanish dress and made it out of pineapple. They learned to hide in plain sight. They learned that if you can't fight the enemy with a sword, you fight them with a song. If you can't wear armor, you wear the wind. This is the genius of Filipino culture. It is not a culture of submission, it is a culture of subversion. And now that we understand the culture, we are ready for the final chapter. We have covered the land, the people, the food, the myths, the government, and the art. But there is one final layer, the invisible glue that holds it all together. Let's start with the most famous Filipino quirk, lip pointing, or nguso. If you ask a Filipino for directions, they won't use their finger. They will pout their lips, raise their eyebrows, and lift their chin. It's efficient, it's silent. But why? The common answer is that it's just easier when your hands are full. But anthropologists and historians point to a deeper, more superstitious origin. In pre-colonial animist culture, the world was filled with nature spirits, Nuno Sapunso, or Diwatas in the trees. Pointing your finger was considered aggressive. It channeled energy. If you pointed your finger at a tree or an anthill, you might accidentally offend a spirit. You might poke a dwarf in the eye. And the punishment? Illness, bad luck, or swelling. So the ancestors adapted. They used the lips. It's soft, it's vague, it's non-threatening. It's a way of navigating the physical world without disturbing the spiritual one. The superstition faded, but the muscle memory remained. It became a cultural code for politeness. And speaking of spirits, let's talk about knocking. When a Filipino knocks on a door, they say, "Topo." The direct translation is, "Person, sir, ma'am," or "I am a person." Now, think about that. Why do you need to announce that you are a human? Why not just hello? Because in the old world, the things knocking at your door weren't always human. We talked about the Aswang in part 5. These shape-shifting monsters could look like animals or people, but they couldn't speak human languages perfectly. The phrase originated as "Tao po ako, hindi aswang," which is, "I am a person, not a monster." It was a security clearance. It was a way to assure the homeowner that you weren't there to eat their liver. Over centuries, the "not a monster" part dropped off, leaving just "Tao po." So every time you visit a Filipino home and say that phrase, you are technically performing an ancient anti-monster ritual. It's a dopamine breadcrumb from a time when the night was full of terrors. And speaking of fears, do you have a superstition in your family that you still follow even if it seems silly? Comment below with your weirdest family superstition. Now, once you get inside the house, what do? You greet the elders. You take their hand, bow your head, and press their hand to your forehead. You say, "Mano po." This is the ultimate sign of respect. But is it Spanish or is it Filipino? Mano is Spanish for hand. So for a long time, people thought this was a colonial imposition, that the Spanish friars forced the Indios to kiss their hands as a sign of submission. And it's true, the friars did demand hand kissing. But the Filipinos, they hacked it. They blended it with a pre-colonial custom found in Malaysia and Indonesia called salim. In the ancient Malay world, bowing to an elder and sniffing or pressing their hand was a way to receive their bisa, energy, or blessing. So, when the Spanish arrived, the Filipinos took the Spanish word mano but kept the indigenous meaning. They aren't kissing the hand of a master. They are asking for the blessing of an elder. It's a transfer of wisdom. That's why you ask, "Pa bless po." It's a perfect example of cultural survival. They took a symbol of colonial power, the hand, and turned it back into a symbol of family solidarity. And speaking of family, have you noticed how Filipinos call everyone ate or kuya? Even the waiter, even the taxi driver? This isn't Spanish, and it is an Austronesian. It's Chinese. The words come from Hokkien. Kuya comes from ko, older brother, and a suffix for kinship. Koa became kuya. Ate comes from chi, eldest sister. Filipinos adopted these trade terms from Chinese merchants centuries ago and applied them to everyone. Why? Because of kapwa. We treat strangers like kin. By calling the taxi driver kuya, you are verbally pulling him into your family circle. You are saying, "You are not a stranger, you are my brother." Now, let's go to the Sari Sari store. These tiny convenience stores are everywhere, and you'll notice something unique. You can buy 1 cigarette, 1 packet of shampoo, 1 cup of cooking oil. This is called timbi culture. Why do Filipinos buy in such small amounts? It seems more expensive in the long run. The root is linguistic. Tingi comes from konting hingi, asking for a little. In pre-colonial barter trade, you didn't buy a whole sack of rice if you didn't need it. You negotiated for just what you needed for dinner. But in the modern era, this evolved into a survival strategy for the poor. It's the sachet economy. When you earn money daily, you spend money daily. You can't afford a $10 bottle of shampoo, but you can afford a 10-cent packet. But there is a dopamine twist here. Corporations realize this. Massive multinationals like Unilever and Nestle completely changed their manufacturing just for the Philippines. They sachetized everything. It's an example of how a local cultural habit forced global giants to adapt. But it's also a curse. The tingi culture creates massive plastic waste. Those millions of sachets end up in the ocean. It is a social norm born of resiliency that has become an environmental crisis. A habit that saved the pocket is now choking the planet. Now, the elephant in the room. Filipino time. Being 15, 30, or 60 minutes late to a party is considered normal. Westerners call it disrespectful. But historians suggest it might be a form of colonial resistance. During the Spanish era, Indios were forced to provide labor, polo y servicio. They had to build churches and ships for free. They hated it. So what did they do? They dragged their feet. They showed up late. They worked slowly. It was a way to reclaim agency. You own my body, but you don't own my time. This passive resistance became a cultural habit. Also, the Principalia, the VIPs, would arrive late to mass or events to show their importance. The party doesn't start until I get there. So, Filipino time is a mix of agricultural pacing, where time is measured by the sun, not a watch, and a colonial hangover of rebellion and status signaling. It's annoying today, sure, but knowing it started as a screw you to the Spanish colonizers makes it kind of punk rock. Finally, let's talk about food. Not what they eat, which we did in part 3, but how they eat. Kamayan, eating with your hands. This is the pre-colonial default. It connects you to the food. You mix the rice and sauce with your fingers. It's intimate. The Americans tried to civilize this away with spoons and forks, and they partially succeeded, which is why Filipinos use a spoon and fork, never a knife. But kamayan survived, and recently it evolved into something massive, the boodle fight. You've seen it, a long table covered in banana leaves, piles of rice, seafood, wheat, and fruit. Everyone stands shoulder to shoulder and eats with their hands. No plates, no utensils. But here is the aha moment. This is not an ancient tradition. It started in the military, specifically the Philippine Military Academy. It was a way to build camaraderie between cadets and officers. In a boodle fight, rank disappears. The general eats the same rice as the private. They stand side by side. The term boodle is actually American military slang for contraband sweets. So this traditional feast is actually a remix of American military culture and pre-colonial hand-eating, turned into a symbol of equality. It says, "We are all the same when we eat." So what is the lesson? What connects lip-pointing, mono-po, boodle fights, and kuya? It's the concept we touched on in Part 4, Paki Ramdam, sensitivity, and kapwa, shared self. Filipino social norms are designed to minimize friction. You point with your lips so you don't offend. You call strangers brother so they feel safe. You eat with your hands to show you aren't above anyone else. You say taupo to bridge the gap between the outside and the inside. It is a social operating system built for a high-context, crowded, collective society. It's about surviving together. It's about making sure that in a world of 7,000 islands and 100 languages, everyone feels like they belong. And that brings us to the end of our journey. We started with the tectonic plates that built the islands. We met the rhino hunters, the boat captains, the revolutionaries, and the mythical monsters. We tasted the adobo and decoded the flag. We found that the Philippines is not a story of a small country. It is a story of world history. It is where East met West, where Islam met Christianity, where the Pacific met Asia. It is a story of collision, of resilience, and an incredible capacity to take the foreign and make it their own. The Philippines is a lushong, a giant mortar. It pounds together Spanish, American, Chinese, and Austronesian ingredients to create something new, something delicious, something unbreakable. And that is it, the end of our 10-part saga. I hope you look at the Philippines differently now, not just as a vacation spot, but as a civilization with a deep, complex, and badass history. And there you have it, the full picture. We started with the fire that forged the land. We walked with the first humans across the land bridges. We sailed with the balangays. We fought with the katipunan, and we danced the tinikling. If there is one lesson from this entire journey, it's this. The Philippines is not just a collection of islands, it is a masterclass in alchemy. It is a culture that took the lusong, the giant mortar, and pounded together Indian mysticism, Chinese trade, Spanish religion, American pop culture, and an unshakable Austronesian spirit to create something entirely new. We saw it in the Barong Tagalog, a Spanish shirt made of pineapple. We heard it in the Kundiman, a Spanish melody hiding a revolution. We feel it in Tao Po, a polite greeting that used to be a defense against monsters. It is a story of a people who didn't just survive history, they hacked it. If you stuck with us through this entire documentary, from the rhinos of Kalinga to the boodle fights of the PMA, you are a legend. Maraming salamat. I hope you look at the Philippines differently now, not just as a destination, but as a civilization. If you learned something new, please share this video. It helps keep these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe for our next deep dive into history. Until then, mabuhay!